A man dripping in power and designer cologne walks into a greasy Boston diner to collect a blood debt, ready to tear a family apart. But the terrified plus-size waitress, trembling behind the counter, isn't just a random victim. She's the only person who ever saved his life. The neon sign of O'Malley's Diner buzzed with a relentless, flickering hum, casting a sickly pink glow over the rain-slicked pavement of South Boston. Inside, Harper Evans wiped down the cracked Formica counter for the 4th time in an hour. Her feet ached, a deep, throbbing pain that radiated up her calves. At 260 pounds, standing for 14-hour shifts in cheap, orthotic shoes was a daily marathon. Her thick thighs chafed beneath the rough polyester of her uniform, and her apron strings dug into the soft flesh of her waist. But Harper couldn't afford to complain. She couldn't afford a lot of things. Most notably, she couldn't afford the $150,000 her father owed the Russo crime syndicate. The diner bell chimed, shattering the stagnant quiet of the late Tuesday night. The air in the room seemed to immediately drop 10 degrees. Harper looked up, brushing a strand of damp, dark hair from her forehead. 4 men stepped through the glass doors. They didn't belong in a place that smelled of stale grease and burnt coffee. They wore bespoke suits that easily cost more than Harper made in a year. They moved with the terrifying, synchronized grace of apex predators. At the front of the pack was a man who sucked the oxygen right out of the room. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and moved with a terrifying stillness. His dark hair was impeccably styled, and his sharp, angular jaw was shadowed by a faint layer of stubble. He wore a charcoal grey suit, and his eyes, a striking, icy blue, swept the empty diner with absolute disdain. Behind Harper, the kitchen door swung open an inch. She heard the sharp, terrified gasp of her father, William. Then the sound of retreating footsteps. He was running. Again. The men didn't run after him. They didn't need to. 2 of the bruisers simply walked around to the back exit, their heavy footsteps echoing ominously. The leader, the man in the charcoal suit, walked directly to the counter and sat on a vinyl stool. It groaned in protest under his solid weight. "Coffee," the man said. His voice was a low, gravelly baritone that vibrated in Harper's chest. "Black." Harper's hands shook as she reached for the glass carafe. She was hyper-aware of her own body, her soft arms, the broadness of her shoulders, the way she took up space in a world that constantly told her to shrink. She poured the dark liquid into a thick ceramic mug, spilling a few drops onto the counter. I can get a rag," she stammered, her voice betraying her terror. "Leave it," the man commanded. He didn't touch the coffee. He looked at her. Really looked at her. His gaze wasn't the usual dismissive glance Harper received from men. It was calculated, piercing, and cold. "Where is William Evans?" "He's not here," Harper lied, her voice cracking. The man beside the leader, a stocky enforcer with a flattened nose named Vincent, let out a harsh laugh. "Don't play stupid, sweetheart. We saw the degenerate's rust bucket parked out back. Tell him Dominic Russo is here to collect, and we are entirely out of patience." Dominic Russo. The name sent a jolt of pure ice down Harper's spine. The Russo family owned half the illicit gambling rings in Massachusetts. They were known for their brutality, their efficiency, and their absolute lack of mercy. Her father, a man who believed the next hand of poker would miraculously fix his ruined life, had finally borrowed from the wrong people. "He doesn't have the money," Harper said, her maternal instinct to protect her pathetic father overriding her survival instinct. She planted her hands on the counter, leaning forward slightly. "He's broke. The diner is failing. Taking him won't get you your money." Dominic's icy blue eyes narrowed. He tilted his head, studying her face. For a fleeting second, a flicker of something, confusion, recognition, crossed his stoic features. But it was gone before Harper could be sure. "This isn't a negotiation, Ms. Evans," Dominic said smoothly, leaning forward until his face was inches from hers. The scent of bergamot and expensive leather washed over her. "Your father borrowed $150,000. He put this diner up as collateral, but this dump isn't worth 50 grand on a good day, which means a debt must be paid in blood." The kitchen doors burst open. The two enforcers dragged William Evans out by his armpits. He was a small, balding man, weeping openly, his apron covered in flour and fear. "Please, Mr. Russo, just give me another month," William sobbed, his knees buckling. "I have a sure thing. A tip on a horse in Belmont." Dominic didn't even look at him. He kept his eyes locked on Harper, watching her reaction as her father whimpered on the linoleum floor. "Pathetic," Vincent sneered, kicking William in the ribs. The older man howled in pain. "Stop it!" Harper screamed. Without thinking, she rushed out from behind the counter. She threw her heavy body between the enforcer and her father, acting as a human shield. "Don't touch him! Please!" Dominic finally stood up. He loomed over Harper, casting a long, dark shadow over her. "You're a loyal daughter," he murmured softly. "But loyalty doesn't pay the interest." "I'll pay it." The words ripped from Harper's throat before her brain could catch up. The diner fell dead silent. Even William stopped his pathetic whimpering to stare at his daughter in shock. Vincent burst into cruel, booming laughter. "You? What are you going to do? Waitresses 1,000,000 tables? Bake us a lot of pies?" He looked her up and down, his eyes lingering mockingly on her wide hips and heavy stomach. "Maybe start a side hustle, though I don't think there's much of a market for—" "Enough, Vincent!" Dominic snapped. The quiet authority in his voice instantly shut the enforcer up. Dominic stepped closer to Harper. She refused to back down, though her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She kept her chin high, refusing to let them see her cry. As Dominic reached out, his hand moving slowly, deliberately, he gripped her chin. His fingers were rough, calloused, but his touch wasn't painful. As his hand moved into the harsh fluorescent light, Harper's breath caught in her throat. There, on the webbing between his left thumb and index finger, was a deep, jagged, crescent-shaped scar. It looked like a bite mark that had healed badly. And just above his left eyebrow, partially hidden by his dark hair, was a faint, white line. Harper's mind violently snapped back 18 years, 1998, the rusted chain-link fence behind St. Jude's Middle School, a blistering hot June afternoon. She had been 12 years old, already heavier than all the other girls, perpetually mocked for her size. She had been hiding behind the dumpsters, eating her lunch in peace, when she heard the sickening sound of flesh hitting concrete. 3 older boys were mercilessly kicking a scrawny, bruised foster kid from the neighborhood. They called him gutter trash. They had stomped on his hand, and one had bitten him when he tried to fight back, leaving a bloody crescent-shaped tear. Harper hadn't thought. She had just acted. She had picked up a heavy, discarded metal pipe and charged, her weight and pure fury completely overwhelming the bullies. She had swung wildly, cracking one boy in the ribs and screaming like a banshee until they fled. Then she had knelt in the dirt, tearing her favorite Hello Kitty shirt to wrap the skinny boy's bleeding hand. "What's your name?" she had asked, wiping the blood from his broken nose. "Dommy," the boy had whispered, his icy blue eyes staring at her in awe, as if she were an angel rather than the school's chubby outcast. Harper blinked, the harsh neon lighting of the diner bringing her back to the present. She stared at the terrifying Mafia Boss holding her chin, the broad shoulders, the expensive suit, the ruthless reputation. They were all a carefully constructed armor. But underneath it all, hidden in the structure of his jaw and the ice of his eyes, was the scrawny, broken boy she had bled for. "Dommy?" she breathed. The word was barely a whisper, but in the dead silence of the diner, it sounded like a gunshot. Dominic's entire body went rigid. The cold, impenetrable mask of the Mafia Don violently fractured. His icy eyes widened, dropping down to search her face frantically. He took in her soft, round cheeks, the familiar tilt of her dark eyes, the stubborn set of her jaw that hadn't changed since she was 12 years old. His grip on her chin loosened, but he didn't pull his hand away. His thumb brushed lightly against her jawline. "Harper?" Dominic's voice was hoarse, entirely stripped of its previous menace. Vincent, oblivious to the monumental shift in the atmosphere, stepped forward. "Boss, you know this broad?" Dominic didn't answer him. He was staring at Harper as if she were a ghost. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. The reality of the situation began to crash down on them both. She was the daughter of a degenerate gambler who owed his crime family a fortune. He was a ruthless killer, tasked with making an example of them. "You grew up," Harper whispered, a bitter, sad smile touching her lips. "I see you didn't stay out of trouble." Dominic's chest rose and fell sharply. For a decade and a half, he had looked for the brave girl who had saved him that day behind the school. When he had finally gained power in the syndicate, he had tried to track her down, but she and her father had moved abruptly, leaving no forwarding address. And now, the universe had delivered her right into his hands, wrapped in a debt he was supposed to collect with violence. "Boss," Vincent pressed, growing impatient. "What are we doing here? Do I break the old man's legs or what?" Dominic tore his eyes away from Harper and looked down at William, who was cowering on the floor, weeping. Disgust curled the edge of Dominic's lips. He couldn't let William go. The Russo family survived on reputation. If word got out that Dominic spared a debtor because of nostalgia, it would show weakness. The sharks in his own family would circle. A debt had to be paid. Collateral had to be taken. Dominic looked back at Harper. His mind raced, calculating, strategizing, bending the strict laws of his violent world to protect the one person he considered sacred. "No," Dominic said loudly, his voice echoing in the diner. He stepped back, straightening his suit jacket, the mask of the Don firmly back in place. "Breaking his legs won't get us our money. William Evans is a useless asset." "Then we take the diner," Vincent said. "The diner is worthless," Dominic replied coldly. He looked directly at Harper, his blue eyes flashing with a possessive, dangerous light. "But a debt must be collected. The contract allows for the seizure of physical assets of equal value." Harper felt a cold dread wash over her. "Dominic, what are you doing?" she whispered. Dominic ignored her question. He turned to his men. "Take the girl." William gasped. "No, please, not Harper. She has nothing to do with this." "She has everything to do with this," Dominic stated, his tone leaving absolutely no room for argument. "She offered to pay the debt, She is now property of the Russo family until the $150,000 is worked off. Vincent looked confused but smirked. What's she gonna do for us, boss? Clean the estate? She's coming with me, Dominic said softly, though the command was absolute. He looked at Harper, sending a silent, desperate plea through his eyes that his men couldn't see. Trust me. Pack a bag, Harper. You belong to me now. The drive from the gritty, rain-soaked pavement of South Boston to the opulent, sprawling suburbs of Brookline felt to Harper like crossing the river Styx into an entirely different dimension. She sat rigidly in the back of the armored Mercedes Maybach, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles turned a stark, bruised white. The plush, butter-soft leather seats felt entirely alien against her cheap, grease-stained polyester diner uniform. Outside the heavily tinted windows, the tightly packed tenements and flickering street lamps of her reality slowly faded, replaced by winding, heavily wooded roads and massive wrought-iron gates that guarded generational wealth and unspeakable secrets. Dominic sat beside her, radiating a silent, oppressive heat. He had not spoken a single word since they left the diner. He stared out the window, his jaw clenched so tightly that the muscles twitched beneath his skin. Harper was left to drown in her own spiraling panic. What did it actually mean to be the property of a mafia boss? Would she be forced to scrub marble floors? Would she be locked in a windowless basement? Or worse, was Dominic simply using the facade of a debt collection to enact some twisted, delayed revenge for a childhood he wanted to forget? The car glided to a smooth, silent stop in front of a sprawling limestone mansion that looked more like a fortified European castle than a home in Massachusetts. Flanked by armed guards in dark, tailored suits, the estate was a terrifying monument to illicit power. Harper knew the rumors of the Boston underworld. She knew the whispers about the remnants of the old Patriarcha crime family and the ghosts of the Winter Hill gang. Dominic Russo had swallowed them all whole, building an empire on blood and fear. "Get out," Dominic ordered. His voice was flat, entirely devoid of the sudden, shocking vulnerability he had shown in the diner when she had spoken his childhood name. Harper swallowed hard, pushing open her door before one of the hulking enforcers could grab her. She stood on the grand cobblestone driveway, her worn, orthotic shoes painfully out of place against the pristine stone. She wrapped her thick arms around her waist, intensely aware of how she looked. She smelled of old frying oil and stale coffee. Her dark hair was frizzy from the Boston humidity, and her body was soft, wide, and heavy, in a world that undoubtedly valued sharp edges, cruelty, and superficial perfection. Dominic bypassed his men, walking directly toward the grand mahogany double doors. "Follow me, Harper. Keep your head down and your mouth shut." She followed him into a grand foyer bathed in the warm, golden light of a massive crystal chandelier. The floors were imported Italian marble, and the air smelled faintly of expensive beeswax and fresh white lilies. A stoic older woman in a pristine uniform, the head housekeeper, Maria, stood waiting with her hands clasped. "Maria, show our guest to the East Wing suite," Dominic commanded, shedding his bespoke suit jacket and handing it to a waiting guard. "Have a hot meal sent up immediately. Then I want the security feeds on the perimeter checked and doubled." "Yes, Mr. Russo," the housekeeper murmured, her eyes darting to Harper with barely concealed curiosity. Harper planted her feet firmly on the marble. "Wait. Guest? I thought I was your property. I thought I was collateral. Why am I going to a suite?" Dominic turned back to her. Vincent and two other armed men were lingering near the doorway, listening closely. Dominic's eyes flicked to them, then back to Harper. His gaze was a harsh, silent warning. "You are collateral, Miss Evans, and in this house my assets are kept in pristine condition. Go with Maria." The East Wing suite was larger than Harper's entire apartment. It featured a massive king-sized bed draped in heavy silk, a roaring marble fireplace, and a private balcony overlooking the manicured, floodlit grounds. But as the heavy oak door clicked shut and locked from the outside, the luxury meant absolutely nothing. It was still a cage. For 3 agonizing days, Harper saw no one but Maria, who brought her trays of exquisite food, roasted duck, truffle risotto, decadent chocolate torts. Harper expected to be starved or put to grueling work, but instead she was treated with a bizarre, isolating reverence. A wardrobe of expensive, meticulously tailored clothes in her exact plus-size measurements miraculously appeared in the walk-in closet. Flowing emerald silk dresses, soft cashmere sweaters, and perfectly fitted trousers that accommodated her wide hips and heavy thighs without pinching or pulling. On the 4th night, the illusion of isolation shattered. Maria entered the room carrying a breathtaking deep crimson evening gown. "Mr. Russo requests your presence in the formal dining room, Ms. Evans. He is hosting a dinner for his capos. You are to wear this." Harper's stomach plummeted. A dinner with the Mafia elite. She was being paraded. When she descended the grand staircase an hour later, the crimson silk draped beautifully over her generous curves, the rich color complementing her pale skin and dark hair. She felt exposed, terrified, yet strangely empowered by the sheer weight of the fabric. The dining room was the cavernous space, dominated by a long mahogany table. 5 men sat around it, smoking cigars and drinking dark liquor. At the head of the table sat Dominic, looking devastatingly handsome in a black tuxedo. To his right sat an older man, with silver hair and cruel reptilian eyes. This was Lorenzo Russo, Dominic's uncle and the most dangerous underboss in the syndicate. As Harper entered, the room fell dead silent. The men stared at her. Lorenzo's lip curled into a sneer of pure disgust. "Is this some kind of joke, Dominic?" Lorenzo barked, gesturing at Harper with his cigar. "This is the collateral you brought into our home? A fat diner waitress? Uncle Carmine would roll in his grave. What are you doing with this cow? She'll eat us out of house and home before her degenerate father pays us back." The men chuckled nervously. Harper felt the familiar, hot sting of humiliation prick her eyes, but she refused to look down. She squared her broad shoulders, meeting Lorenzo's cruel gaze. Dominic did not laugh. He slowly set his crystal glass of bourbon down on the table. The sharp clink echoed like a gunshot. "Lorenzo," Dominic said, his voice a low, vibrating hum that made the hair on Harper's arms stand up. "You will apologize to Ms. Evans. Right now." Lorenzo scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "Don't be ridiculous, Dom. She's a—" Before Lorenzo could finish the sentence, Dominic moved with terrifying, blinding speed. He grabbed the heavy crystal decanter from the center of the table and smashed it violently across Lorenzo's face. The older man screamed as glass shattered and blood immediately poured from his broken nose, splashing onto the pristine white tablecloth. The other men leapt to their feet, reaching for hidden weapons, but Dominic had already drawn his gun, pressing the barrel directly against Lorenzo's bleeding forehead. "In my house, I demand respect for what is mine," Dominic snarled, his icy blue eyes completely feral. "Say another word about her, Uncle, and I will blow your brains all over this imported wallpaper. Do we have an understanding?" Lorenzo, trembling violently and clutching his ruined face, nodded frantically. Yes, Dominic. I understand. Get out, Dominic roared. The men scrambled, dragging the bleeding Lorenzo out of the dining room. Once they were gone, the heavy silence returned. Dominic lowered his weapon, breathing heavily. He looked at Harper, who was frozen in shock near the doorway. He walked slowly toward her, his anger melting into something far more dangerous. He reached out, his blood-stained hand hovering inches from her face before gently cupping her cheek. "Why did you do that?" Harper whispered, a tear finally escaping her eye. "Because no one disrespected you in my presence. Not ever," Dominic replied, his voice hoarse. "I looked for you, Harper. For 15 years after I fought my way up the ranks, I sent men to find the brave girl who swung a metal pipe for a broken kid. But your father changed your names. You vanished." "I'm not anyone special, Dominic. I'm just a waitress," she cried, gesturing to her heavy body. "I don't belong in this violent, opulent world. You are the only real, purely good thing I have ever known," Dominic growled, sliding his hands down to grip her thick waist possessively. "You saved my life. You looked at a worthless street kid and saw someone worth fighting for. To me, you are a queen, every single inch of you." When his lips crashed down onto hers, it was acclaiming. It was a desperate, scorching kiss that tasted of bourbon and devotion, dissolving Harper's terror into a blinding heat as the Mafia Boss worshipped the very body she had spent her life hiding. The fragile sanctuary Harper found within Dominic's arms was violently ripped away merely 3 days later. Dominic had left the fortified estate to manage a sudden, bloody crisis at the bustling Boston Harbor docks, leaving Harper strictly under the protection of his most trusted guards. However, Dominic had gravely underestimated the deep, festering treachery within his own bloodline. The intense humiliation Lorenzo had suffered in the formal dining room required immediate vengeance, and Lorenzo knew exactly where Dominic's newly exposed weakness lay. Harper was in the sprawling glass greenhouse, admiring blooming orchids, when the estate perimeter alarms were suddenly silenced. 2 hulking men she did not recognize suddenly materialized from the heavy shadows of the thick tropical foliage. Before she could even draw breath to scream, a rough hand violently grabbed her dark hair, and a damp cloth smelling sharply of chemical chloroform was clamped brutally over her nose and mouth. She thrashed wildly, her heavy, strong body fighting desperately against her attackers, but the world violently tilted. The vibrant, lush colors of the greenhouse rapidly blurred into a suffocating, heavy blackness. When Harper finally regained consciousness, the sweet smell of orchids was completely gone, replaced by stinging, salty rust. She was tied tightly to a cold metal chair inside a damp, freezing, abandoned warehouse in the desolate Chelsea shipyard. Pure panic seized her heavy chest as she violently struggled against the thick plastic ties biting deeply into her soft, fleshy wrists. "The sleeping beauty finally awakens," a cruel voice echoed. Lorenzo stepped smoothly out of the pitch-black shadows. His crooked nose was heavily bandaged, his aged face severely bruised and swollen from Dominic's brutal attack. He held a sleek silver pistol, tapping it thoughtfully against his tailored pant leg. "Lorenzo," Harper rasped, coughing as the harsh chemicals burned. "You really caused quite a massive problem for me, sweetheart," Lorenzo sneered, dragging a heavy wooden crate over and sitting down directly across from her. My powerful nephew was a cold, calculating machine before you suddenly showed up, entirely untouchable. But now, he is heavily compromised. He risked alienating his entire inner circle over a fat diner maid. That makes him completely unfit to lead our massive syndicate. He took me only for my father's debt, Harper lied bravely, trying desperately to keep her trembling voice steady despite the absolute terror, fiercely coursing through her violently shaking, frozen, fragile veins. Absolute bullshit, Lorenzo spat viciously. He truly loves you. It is entirely pathetic, but it ultimately works in my distinct favor. I am going to call my dear nephew right now. I am going to tell him to securely sign over the family port territories, the hidden offshore accounts, and his coveted title as Don directly to me. Lorenzo quickly pulled out an untraceable burner phone and happily dialed. Dominic answered on the very first ring, his dark voice a completely panicked, feral growl. Lorenzo, if you brutally touch one single hair on her lovely head, you are completely dead. Just sign the damn papers, Dom, Lorenzo laughed loudly. Come quickly to the Chelsea docks, totally alone. You only have 20 minutes. Lorenzo abruptly hung up the small phone. He firmly smiled cruelly at Harper. He will certainly come. And when he eventually does, my hidden snipers will effortlessly put him down like a heavily rabid dog. Harper suddenly felt a massive surge of pure, unadulterated, fiery rage. She was definitely not a weak, helpless damsel. She looked around cautiously, her sharp eyes catching the faint glint of a dangerously exposed iron nail protruding sharply from the rotting crate nearby. You are a weak coward, Harper spat out with fierce venom. Lorenzo stood up rapidly, incredibly furious, and stepped closely to slap her. As he leaned inward, Harper did not flinch whatsoever. Instead, she threw her entire body weight forcefully forward, bravely launching her heavy frame out of the flimsy chair. She slammed her hard head directly into Lorenzo's broken nose with a sickening, wet crunch. Lorenzo screamed loudly in pure agony, quickly dropping the shiny gun. Harper loudly crashed onto the hard concrete floor, the flimsy chair shattering utterly underneath her. She desperately scrambled frantically toward the rusty nail. The sharp metal tore deeply into her soft skin, but it finally caught the thick plastic tie securely. She boldly pulled with all her remarkable strength, violently screaming loudly through the intense pain until the thick plastic finally snapped completely. Suddenly, the extremely heavy corrugated metal doors of the massive warehouse exploded violently inward with a truly deafening, horrifying screech of tearing steel. A massive black armored SUV had viciously rammed straight through the sturdy barricade. Absolute chaos erupted instantly everywhere. Dominic's fierce enforcers aggressively swarmed the crumbling building, quickly returning heavy fire against Lorenzo's completely stunned armed men seamlessly. Dominic gloriously emerged. He systematically executed Lorenzo's remaining guards with truly terrifying cold precision. Lorenzo panicked terribly. Bleeding profusely, he desperately lunged wildly for his previously dropped pistol, but Dominic was much faster. He viciously kicked the small gun far away and fiercely grabbed his wicked uncle tightly by the throat, pressing his own large weapon squarely against Lorenzo's chest. He decisively pulled the heavy trigger twice. Lorenzo instantly fell completely dead. Dominic dropped his smoking gun, frantically rushing to embrace Harper passionately. Hours later, comfortably back inside the absolutely secure, luxurious estate, Dominic tenderly washed the drying blood away. The heavy debt is officially cleared, Dominic stated quietly, staring sadly downward. I have securely set up an offshore account for you. Leave Boston immediately. My violent world is pure poison. You truly belong in the warm light. Harper bravely stood up, tenderly cupping his handsome face in her soft, healing hands. You definitely do not ever get to make that choice for me, she replied fiercely. You are completely mine. I am never leaving you alone. A devastatingly beautiful, adoring smile finally broke across Dominic's rugged face. Forever, he swore passionately against her soft lips, proudly claiming his queen. From a greasy South Boston diner to the bloody heart of a mafia empire, Harper didn't just survive the underworld, she conquered it. Dominic risked his entire syndicate for the woman who once saved his life, proving that true power lies in fierce, unconditional love that doesn't care about size or society's rules. Did this intense mafia romance keep you absolutely on the edge of your seat? Smash that like button. Share Harper and Dominic's incredible story with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more dramatic tales.